There comes a moment in a woman's life when she realizes that her energy is not free, that every explanation she gives, every argument she entertains, and every time she defends her worth, she is handing over something sacred, and then she chooses withdrawal, not out of anger, not out of bitterness, but because she has finally understood the profound power that silence holds. Withdrawal is not retreat. It is not surrender. It is refinement. It is a conscious decision to pull back, to stop pouring into what no longer fills you. A woman doesn't withdraw because she's weak. She withdraws because she has learned to protect her peace like a temple. Her silence becomes sacred. Her absence becomes louder than her presence ever was. In a world that pressures women to always respond, always be available, always explain themselves, silence becomes an act of rebellion. It becomes spiritual. There is strength in not responding. There is dignity in walking away without a word, because not everything deserves your voice. Not every situation is worthy of your energy. When a woman begins to withdraw, she starts to heal. Her nervous system softens. Her thoughts become clearer. She sees who truly checks in without needing anything. She watches who starts to chase when she stops running. She feels the difference between those who valued her presence and those who only valued her reactions. Withdrawal is the pause that makes space for power. In that silence, a woman hears her own voice again after being drowned out by the noise of the world. She starts to notice how much time she was spending trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding her. How much energy she was losing trying to fix relationships that only survived through her effort. How much she was giving just to feel half seen. And in that clarity, everything shifts, because when a woman stops reacting, people start to reveal themselves. When she no longer argues, the truth becomes louder than her defense. When she steps away, the balance of energy in the room changes. People begin to feel her absence. They notice the silence, the stillness, and they are forced to sit with themselves, often for the first time. Withdrawal is a mirror. It reflects everything that words cannot. It is not about ghosting. It's not about punishing others. It's about redirecting all the energy she once gave outwards, toward herself, toward rebuilding her mind, her boundaries, her breath. She begins to realize that peace is not found in controlling the outer world. It's found in mastering the inner one. And this mastery begins with silence. She no longer tries to fix others. She fixes the parts of herself that felt responsible for everyone's comfort. She stops proving her loyalty to people who made her question her worth. She stops explaining her intentions to those who twisted them anyway. She lets go of the need to be understood and chooses instead to understand herself. In that withdrawal, she becomes mysterious again, not because she's hiding, but because she's healing. She is no longer available for drama disguised as love, no longer responsive to manipulation masked as care, no longer a participant in cycles that drain her soul. She is not disappearing. She is becoming more of herself. Her silence isn't empty. It is filled with wisdom, with quiet power, with boundaries, with the sound of her own breathing uninterrupted. And in that state, where she says less, does less, reacts less, everything that was misaligned begins to fall away. The noise fades, the games lose power, the people who were drawn to her pain fall off, and those who truly respect her energy rise into view. Because when a woman chooses withdrawal, she is not choosing isolation. She is choosing recalibration. She is choosing to remember who she was before the world told her to always be loud, always be giving, always be available. She is choosing stillness not as an escape, but as a return to herself, a return to her truth, a return to her center where her power was waiting all along. A woman's energy is her most sacred currency. It is not her time, her beauty, or even her voice that holds the greatest power. It is the quality of her presence, what she gives her attention to, what she allows into her space, what she emotionally engages with. These choices shape her world. And once a woman learns this truth, she stops leaking energy and starts guarding it like a gatekeeper of her soul. Because energy is not infinite. It is precious. It is life force. And too often women are taught to give it freely to anyone who demands it without asking if they've earned it. She's taught to be polite even when she's uncomfortable, to stay kind even when someone is being cruel, to be available even when her spirit is tired. But when a woman starts to realize that her energy is protection, not everyone gets access anymore. She no longer over-explains. She no longer entertains conversations that drain her. She no longer argues with people who twist her words or play the victim in her truth. She stops picking up calls that carry anxiety. She stops replying to messages that poke at her peace. She starts to understand that being unbothered is not cold. It's powerful. There is a cost to giving away energy carelessly. it leaves a woman emotionally bankrupt, physically exhausted, and mentally scattered. And when that happens, she forgets her worth. She doubts her intuition. She begins to accept less, tolerate more, and question herself in places where she used to stand tall. She remembers that not everything deserves her reaction, that not every conflict needs her participation. That silence is a shield. That ignoring provocation is not weakness, it is control. She learns that protecting her energy is not about building walls, it's about building filters. Who gets to enter her life? Who gets to stay? Who gets to speak into her mind? These are all decisions of power. She starts to notice how some people only show up when they need something, how some situations only exist to steal her focus, how some conversations are never about resolution, only about control. And she removes herself from all of it, not with noise, not with revenge, but with quiet clarity. She no longer chases closure. She gives it to herself. She no longer explains why she's pulling away. Her peace speaks for her. She no longer wants people to treat her right. She simply stops showing up where she's disrespected. And that shift, subtle, internal, invisible to the world, is the rebirth of her power. Because when a woman protects her energy, she becomes untouchable. She stops getting triggered by things that used to break her. She no longer bends to gain approval or shrinks to make others comfortable. Her presence becomes sharper, cleaner, more grounded. People feel the shift, even if they can't name it. They sense the boundary. They respect the silence. She focuses it on growth, on self-love, on her goals, on her healing, on nourishing the parts of her that were neglected while she was too busy holding space for everyone else. She learns to give herself the attention she used to crave from others. She learns that peace isn't something found in others. It's something created within her. Intuition gets louder. Her vision becomes clearer. Her standards rise, and suddenly everything felt confusing becomes obvious. Who to distance from, what to walk away from, where to invest, who to trust. All of it becomes self-evident when she stops outsourcing her energy and begins protecting it like a queen guards her crown. Because a woman's energy is not for public consumption. It is not for negotiation, not a resource for the emotionally irresponsible or the spiritually reckless. It is for building, for creating, for expanding, for loving with depth, but only where it's safe to do so, for connecting deeply, but never at the cost of self-betrayal. She becomes selective, not because she's arrogant, but because she's aware. She's seen what happens when she gives too much of herself to the wrong people, and she's made a vow to never do that again. So she protects her energy with intention, with discipline, with grace. There is a profound shift that happens in a woman's life when she begins to turn inward, not out of selfishness, but out of self-honor. She realizes that focusing on herself isn't abandoning anyone, it's returning to the one person she's been neglecting the longest, herself. This return is not loud, it is not always applauded, but it is sacred, because when a woman truly focuses on herself, she reclaims every part of her power that she gave away in the name of love, validation, or acceptance. Self-focus is not vanity, it is self-respect. It is understanding that no one is coming to rescue you, heal you, or complete you. It's taking full responsibility for your energy, your mindset, your choices, your life. And that awareness is liberating. Because a woman who no longer waits to be chosen is a woman who finally chooses herself. It begins quietly. She starts making different decisions, not to impress anyone, but to align with her peace. She invests in her health, not for appearance, but for vitality. She reads, learns, evolves, not to seem intelligent, but to understand her own mind. She creates routines that nourish her. She lets go of people and patterns that exhaust her. She begins to protect her mornings, guard her thoughts, speak kindly to herself in private. That's what self-respect looks like when no one is watching. A self-focused woman doesn't shrink herself to fit in. She doesn't overextend herself to be liked. She doesn't compromise her boundaries for the comfort of others. She is not hard, but she is solid. She is not arrogant, but she is aware. She knows that the more she waters her own garden, the less she's tempted to chase validation from those who only bring drought. This focus is not about perfection, it's about alignment. She understands that no amount of external love can replace the internal relationship she has with herself. So she stops abandoning herself to please others. She stops sacrificing her truth just to keep the peace. She stops apologizing for wanting more, needing space, or choosing herself. She begins to say no, not to reject others, but to honor her yes. She says yes to things that align with her growth, her healing, her vision. She becomes deliberate. She learns that not every opportunity is meant for her. Not every relationship deserves her loyalty. Not every invitation deserves her presence. and that discernment becomes her power. Self-focus allows her to see clearly. It removes the fog created by people-pleasing and codependency. She no longer lives for applause. She no longer fears disapproval. She no longer explains herself to people committed to misunderstanding her. Instead, she focuses on building herself, nurturing herself, and elevating her life in ways that require no audience. She becomes magnetic, not because she's trying to be, but because she is in her own lane, minding her own peace, mastering her own journey. She stops chasing closure from others and finds it within. She stops trying to be enough for people who are not even enough for themselves. She stops waiting for someone to see her because she sees herself now. And as she pours more into herself, her world changes, her standards shift, her relationships transform. She no longer tolerates what once drained her. She no longer begs to be heard, seen, or loved. She simply is fully, freely, authentically. Her presence becomes her message. Her boundaries become her language. Her self-worth becomes non-negotiable. This focus does not isolate her. It empowers her. It teaches her to show up for herself the way she once showed up for others, to encourage herself the way she once encouraged others, to be loyal to herself the way she once was loyal to people who didn't deserve it. And in doing so, she doesn't become less loving. She becomes more discerning about where that love goes. She no longer exhausts herself proving her value. She knows her value in silence. She no longer bends to avoid rejection. She knows that her alignment is more important than anyone's approval. She no longer seeks to be everything for everyone. She becomes everything she needs for herself first. There is a wisdom that only silence can teach. A woman doesn't come to that wisdom quickly. It arrives after years of explaining herself to those who never listened, defending her heart to those who never cared, and arguing her truth in spaces where ego ruled over understanding. And one day she simply stops, not because she doesn't have anything to say, but because she finally sees that silence carries more power than words ever could. Silence is not empty. It is full of answers. It is not passive. It is a deliberate of presence, of self-control, of emotional mastery. When a woman chooses silence over argument, she's not avoiding conflict, she's rising above it. She understands that not every battle deserves her energy. Not every insult deserves a response. Not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected. A woman who chooses her silence has learned that trying to prove her intentions to someone determined to twist them is a losing game. She knows that engaging with someone who thrives on chaos only fuels the fire. She recognizes that arguing with someone who listens only to respond, not to understand, is an energy leak. And so she chooses to disengage, not to punish, but to protect. It says, I will not lower my frequency to be heard by someone who cannot meet me where I stand. It says, I don't owe you a reaction just because you're demanding one. It says, like you go to bed, I value my peace more than I value being right in your eyes. These are truths that do not need to be spoken aloud. They are felt in the space she leaves behind when she exits a conversation, a room, a dynamic, because silence exposes truth in ways arguments never can. In the absence of her voice, others begin to hear themselves clearly. Without her explanations, projections are revealed. Without her emotional labor, the imbalance becomes undeniable. Silence holds up a mirror. It reveals motives, intentions, and wounds. And in that reflection, people either awaken or they recoil. But either way, clarity is born. She no longer needs to yell to be heard. She no longer needs to beg to be understood. She no longer needs to her voice to defend herself against lies. The truth has a way of surfacing when she removes herself. Her absence becomes her boundary. Her quiet becomes her clarity. This silence is not cold. It is calculated. It's the choice of a woman who knows that her peace is too expensive to be sacrificed in an argument with someone committed to chaos. It's the choice of someone who values emotional intelligence over emotional reaction. It's not about being indifferent. It's about being intentional. And in this silence, she reclaims her time. She reclaims her power. She reclaims the energy she once gave to unnecessary battles. The battles that left her exhausted. The arguments that led nowhere. The conversations that only chipped away at her self-worth. Now she chooses silence as an act of healing, as an act of wisdom, as an act of revolution. The word teaches women to explain, to justify, to defend. But when she learns the language of silence, she becomes fluent in boundaries. She no longer argues to be seen. She sees herself. She no longer explains her value. She embodies it. She no longer needs external permission to honor her internal truth. People begin to notice. They notice her calm, her distance, her restraint. They feel the power in her stillness. They question what they did wrong when she no longer engages. And that silence becomes a louder message than any speech could ever deliver. Not out of malice, but because she has finally realized she doesn't owe chaos an explanation. She speaks with her decisions now, with her boundaries, with the spaces she no longer enters and the people she no longer entertains. Her energy becomes her language. Her stillness becomes her answer. And in this silence, she begins to attract what noise always kept away: clarity, peace, respect. And truth, there is a moment in every woman's life when she stops chasing, stops forcing, stops proving, and begins aligning. She shifts her focus inward and starts asking herself one powerful question: does this match who I am becoming? In that question, she unlocks the key to everything she's been searching for. Because alignment is not about controlling outcomes. It's about becoming so rooted in your truth that everything meant for you flows naturally in your direction. Alignment is the quiet work. It is the inner rebuilding. It's the decision to choose clarity over confusion, peace over chaos, purpose over pressure. It's no longer entertaining what feels heavy to the soul, no longer engaging in dynamics that disturb the spirit. When a woman aligns with her highest self, she no longer negotiates her intuition. She trusts it. She no longer asks for permission to evolve. She simply rises. She begins to feel when something is off, not just mentally, but in her body, her energy, her emotions, and she no longer silences those signals just to keep others comfortable. She no longer betrays her inner compass for temporary validation. Instead, she honors her rhythm. She follows the quiet pull within that says, this is not for you, even when everything around her says, this is what you should want. Alignment is choosing what feels right over what looks right. She doesn't just ask, does this look good on the outside? She asks, does this feel good on the inside? And if the answer is no, she steps back. She knows now that not all opportunities are aligned. Not all people are aligned. Not all desires are rooted in truth. And she's no longer afraid to release what no longer fits the woman she is becoming. This doesn't mean life becomes perfect. It means she stops forcing things to fit. She stops bending to make room for what no longer belongs. She stops shrinking in environments where she was never meant to thrive. She knows that anything forced will drain her and anything aligned will sustain her. So she begins to release the grip. She begins to surrender. In that surrender, something powerful begins to happen. What used to feel like struggle now feels like flow. What once felt like resistance becomes ease. The right people begin to show up. Those who honor her boundaries, who see her clearly, who meet her with equal energy. The right opportunities begin to align, not because she chased them, but because she prepared for them in silence. Alignment is preparation. It's not just about receiving, it's about becoming. She becomes the woman who no longer tolerates confusion, who no longer waits for others to choose her, who no longer abandons herself in relationships, careers, or conversations. Her energy becomes so consistent that anything out of alignment stands out immediately. She doesn't need to analyze it for days. She feels it instantly, and she acts accordingly. There is a different kind of peace that comes when a woman is aligned. It's not just calm, it's clarity. It's the knowing that she doesn't have to perform to be valued, that she doesn't have to chase to be chosen, that she doesn't have to settle to feel secure, because she has already chosen herself. She has already built her foundation. She has already said yes to the life that truly matches her essence, and this alignment magnetizes everything. Peace returns, confidence grows, doors open, relationships deepen, not because she's doing more, but because she's being more of who she really is. She's no longer pulled in 100 directions. She's centered, grounded, clear. Her yes has power. Her no has boundaries. Her silence has depth. Her presence speaks before she says a word. She is no longer looking outward for answers. She has turned inward. And that shift has changed everything. She no longer forces things to stay. She trusts that what is aligned will remain. She doesn't beg for connection. She trusts that what's meant for her will feel mutual, effortless, clear. And she is willing to let go of anything that doesn't resonate with that frequency. You to bed, alignment is not about you attract. It's about what you allow, what you choose, what you embody. When a woman becomes aligned, she becomes unavailable for anything that disrupts her peace, distracts her path, or dilutes her power.